Welcome to the Daily Word, verse by verse. Grab your Bibles and follow along as we study the book of Revelation. Keep in mind, I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Bible, so if you're using a different translation, the read is different, but the message is the same. We're going to pick it up in chapter 20 and in verse 11. Now, as a matter of the order of events, chapter 20 begins with the arrival of Jesus and the saints, the armies, which will be us, those believers, as well as those who come through the tribulation period, those who held true to the testimony of Jesus. He evicts the beast. He evicts the false prophet. They are thrown directly into the lake of fire, which we'll get to what this lake of fire is later. He puts a seal, he chains up Satan and throws him into the abyss. Put a seal on him. So Satan cannot deceive the nations for 1,000 years. Then Jesus rules for 1,000 years. And after 1,000 years is finished, Satan is let loose. He deceives the world, and they rebel against God. They try to wage war with him. Fire comes down and destroys them. So then Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, which is interesting, that I said, and I'll re-emphasize again, there is no epic battle or struggle between good and evil. At this point, Satan has served God's purpose. God is through with him, and now he is dealt with eternally. He is thrown in the lake of fire. We no longer hear from him forever. Now we come to the judgment. Now verse 11 says, Then I saw a great white throne, and one seated on it. Earth and heaven fled from his presence, and no place was found for them. So this is probably one of the hardest concepts of Christianity that people have with. In other words, if we just take this element away, most people probably wouldn't have a problem with Christianity. There's some that would probably say, I'm not religious, whatever, but what makes Christianity most objectionable is this idea of eternal judgment, because if you take that away, there's no reason for Jesus to come. Or I should say, there's no reason for Jesus to come. Jesus saves man from the wrath of God. So the issue is that man is rejecting Jesus' salvation. And so in rejecting Jesus' salvation, now he faces eternal damnation. And the idea of eternal damnation so rocks the psyche of people. And it should. And as I often say, the bigger issue is, why are people not obeying the gospel? And of course, we know the answer to that, as we've been tracking it through our the book of Revelations here, is this sinfulness of man. Now, also, even before this period, if you look at our lives today, in the present world, why aren't people obeying the gospel? And what's interesting is, remember in John, he makes a statement that wickedness is already at work. The works of the makings of the Antichrist is already at work. In fact, Paul called it the spirit of lawlessness, which is going to conclude with the manifestation of the beast, of the false prophet of Revelation 13. But he said it's already at work, but there is something restraining that from its coming to its fullness. See, its full manifestation. The reason why I bring that up is because when that restraint is removed, the earth quickly moves towards its ultimate wickedness sinfulness and rebellion against God. So we just saw this in chapter 20, where in the faith where people have lived for 1,000 years under Jesus' rule, Satan is not around, which tells us Satan is the factor of why people are corrupted. He's not to blame, because as we're going to see, God is going to judge people for their sinfulness, their choices. But Satan is the factor that he corrals them, and he corrals them by corrupting their minds, the thoughts. And when he is taken out of the picture, and we see he's taken out of the picture for 1,000 years, you have people who are not rebellious against God. By the way, that becomes one of the greatest deceptions about what people think America is. How you see people saying, America needs to get back to God, as if America was ever a part of God in the sense of being this godly nation. The idea is that whenever you find the presence then of godliness taken out of the way, and we see it in our nation today, so now people are moving away from a godly ideology, a Christian thought. It was bound to happen. It was going to cycle this way. Okay, so people now are saying, well, we need to, pass more laws. Where we already had those laws. If you want to go into this kind of fantasy that America in the 40s and the 50s was this kind of great virtue, and it wasn't. And again, I don't want to get really off into that, because the truth of the matter is that America was always a sinful nation. The fact that you had Jim Crow, slavery, the fact that you had these people who were in the closet, homosexuals, lifestyles. In other words, the ungodly has always been there. They just had to put on a front. Okay? So the point here is to understand that when Satan is restrained, and to whatever degree sinfulness is restrained, then people can for a while act a certain way. But then when you remove that, one of the stats that tells us today is the most fastest growing segment of society are those who are calling themselves non-religious. They don't have any religious affiliation. Now, they could be atheists, they could be agnostics, but in some sense, they just don't have any religious affiliation. Now, of course, that's spiritually dangerous, because then, what's governing them? And we know where this is going to go. And so where this comes up at is people are going to be ripe for the world to be swept in a way away from God. So now we come to this great white throne judgment, because all of the things that you hear with people today really is just a mask. And when you remove it away, even in our day, right now, today, we're not in the tribulation period, right? We're not faced with the ultimate man of sin. But people will not turn to Christ today. And why is that? Because the sinfulness. And I've seen some of the most sweet, meek people. They're just good people, we would say, but refuse to surrender to God. They're going to be in this great white throne judgment. Now, this great white throne judgment, unlike, remember, we've seen thrones throughout, right? The book of Revelation. In the 4th chapter, we see the splendor and the glorious throne of God, where the host of heaven and the people of heaven from every tribe and every generation, every language, are surrounding the throne, worshiping God. This throne is different, because now this is the throne of judgment, the great white throne judgment. And as I said, it's something that people shudder. They hate this. I'll pick it up with this. I'll continue with this in the next video, so I'll see you then.